Welcome, casemakers near and far. I'm Dr. Tiffany Manuel, and I'm the CEO and founder of The Case Made. One of the best things about the work that I do is that I get to travel the globe, and I get to hear amazing people who are doing the kind of things in their communities that are just so awesome. And when I hear great case making, there's only one thing that comes to mind: fierce. That's the energy of this series, and that's why I've invited you in. So come on in, take a listen. This is Fierce Case Making. Great. Well, welcome, Fierce Case Makers, to the latest episode. I am joined by a fantastic fierce case maker, local to me, actually, here in Orlando. And I'm so excited to bring you some of the ways that he thinks powerfully about making the case for the community building that is happening right here in Orlando. Eddie Morrison, thank you for joining me today.
No, Dr. T, what a privilege it is for me to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
So, even before we started just now, we were having an ongoing conversation about case making and what it means to get out in front, right? And talk about what the vision is for your community, but bring people to do very specific things in the moment that are aligned with this bigger vision. We're going to get there in a second. But before we get there, say a little bit about the work that you do at the organization that you represent right now, Lift Orlando, and what brought you to that role as this incredible champion for community building as a community quarterback.
Thank you. Well, Lift Orlando is an organization that has been working in the heart of the 33805 zip code in Orlando. Our mission is to strengthen neighborhoods so people can thrive. Mm-hmm. The vision we're working towards is neighborhoods where children grow up with hope and return with joy. In other words, the definition of success ceases to be to get away from the neighborhood or out of the neighborhood. But in fact, it would be such a place of choice with so many great options to choose from. When children grow up and can live anywhere they want, they couldn't think of a better place than the same neighborhood to come back, raise their own children, creating generational cycles of prosperity. We define ourselves as business leaders in partnership with residents to really advance neighborhood revitalization in a holistic way. That means we invest in mixed income housing, cradle to career education, community health and wellness, and long-term economic viability. Essentially, is the community doing better year over year, financially and in every other way?
Absolutely. So let's get into it. You know, there are lots of what we're going to talk about that I think are just unique to the way that you all do things that are just fantastic. And I want to make sure that people, you know, across the country who are trying to do this kind of work kind of understand about your success and the model of it. But one of the things that I love about how you even describe your work is to say that we're business leaders in partnership with community. That's a very different way than most folks who do or trying to do this kind of work think about themselves. Say a little more about how you got there and why it's important to say that in that way.
Well, part of it is my own personal journey. You know, at a young age, my parents divorced and my mom found herself a single mom with 4 kids living in public housing, taking advantage of every public benefit we could, whether it was food stamps or Section 8, you name it, we were in line for it. But eventually she remarried, and my stepdad was a serial entrepreneur who started his first business when he was in high school. I remember my first regular paycheck job was working for a furniture manufacturing business he had. And I saw the power of entrepreneurship to provide for our family, but also people in our community. That he was sort of the go-to person in that space. Fast forward later in my career, I worked for the Orlando Chamber of Commerce here when we were the 5th largest chamber in the country. And I worked for a visionary leader, Jacob Stewart, who launched the first public-private partnership with the state of Florida to address the fact that Clinton had passed laws that you had to prove that you were trying to find work if you wanted to receive TANF benefits. But we had 2% unemployment in Central Florida, and it became a great argument for mobilizing CEOs and HR directors to learn how to hire, train, and retain entry-level talent. And we saw thousands of people engage in employment, start careers, go back to school, and provide for their families, for many of them for the very first time. And it was the first time I got a taste that when you get the business community involved in solving fundamental community problems, you can sort of accelerate and create outsized results that are harder for the bootstrapping nonprofit or the elected official running on short-term limits. That if you can get business leaders there, it elevates what's possible. You still need every other player.
Yeah.
And so for us, we also didn't start as just a neighborhood effort. In fact, we had zero intentions of starting a nonprofit. There was a handful of friends that started meeting. I had relationships with many of these CEOs downtown who were very philanthropic, but were also very frustrated. They felt like they were going to a lot of rubber chicken dinners and golf tournaments and writing big checks, but reading the paper, and it seemed like nothing was changing.
Yeah.
And after many months of meeting on a regular basis, we began to discover that there was an absence of what's called place-based philanthropy in our city, that although most of our causes were serving issues across the region, most of our problems, the environments that made our children and families more vulnerable, were limited to a handful of locations. If you put them on a heat map, you could see they were the same predictable neighborhoods most of us know, and that was true in most cities. So we launched our effort to create a holistic approach, and we realized that this is a much better investment, not just of financial resources, but of the strategic thinking, results orientation, networks, influence that business leaders bring to the table. But we used to obsess a lot about, are we actually attacking root causes?
Yep.
Because crime is a symptom. Obesity is a symptom. A lot of other issues we talk about, these are symptoms. The real issue for our children, for our families, what are the environments that are causing negative effects in people's lives? And we found that if you really study the history for most of these communities, there is a common trend of disinvestment, conscious disinvestment made in these communities. And if you think back, who were the people and the roles in communities that had the power to do that or not do that, you often find leaders in business and commerce that have the influence to steer public will and policy. And so the thought that it's not just nice for business leaders to take on corporate social responsibility and do the right thing. In fact, it seems just that they would be the ones that would use the same skills, banking, finance, real estate, power, to reverse these cycles into cycles of prosperity. So that sort of became our logic, that we don't want to leave business leaders off the hook, and we don't want to relegate them to writing checks. We want to put them in a position of leadership, but then you got to curb that hubris with the leadership of the people who actually live in the community by making it a partnership.
So talk a little bit more about that, because I think that can often be the struggle, right? Especially in terms of case making. When community residents hear you talk to business leaders about the things that business leaders talk about and present a case that is about, the economic development of the region and the prosperity of the region and about the workforce development, right? They may feel somewhat left out of that. And then you also have to have a conversation that is specific to community residents, which may not always be right, the same case that business leaders want to hear you talk about. So the ability to bring some of that together in a very thoughtful way is both challenging and also, honestly, incredibly disruptive in a positive way. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
So true. I think it's important for business leaders to realize that they have a unique role to play, that they're responsible to play that role, and that they cannot abdicate that responsibility to other parties, that the business community is the seat of civic leadership, of volunteer influence. And yet that if you want to make a difference in a community that's not your own, you have no business showing up there regardless of how good your intentions are. So you have to find ways to come alongside the positive voices and leaders that are already there. So it's as if you're sort of stirring up the will and the resources to act, but then you have to have enough humility to pause and listen and learn and seek the opportunities to come alongside a community in meaningful, lasting ways. But that at first requires a lot of patience, a lot of listening, a lot of people who are highly suspect of whatever this might be, and for good reason. I mean, I got called a lot of names. You imagine how suspect I sounded with a big smile saying, I'm here from the downtown business community and we want to help. People had a lot of choice words for me. And, at first it feels unfair. You're showing up to do good, and that you get all kinds of conspiracy theories about your evil, diabolical agenda. But if you think about it, given what history teaches us about what typically happens in these type of engagements, people are right to think
That's
the
right.
things they typically think. And it's actually quite logical for them to be very, very suspicious. So it does require for us a process that we sort of spell out into 4 steps. One is to obsess about learning the root cause. Understand before you try to address a social ill of any kind. Ask why and ask why and ask why until you dig beneath the surface of health outcomes or educational attainment or crime to begin to find out that something that creates the concentration of need in these communities, the phenomena of disinvestment and that history starts to like turn on a light bulb. And once you get to root causes, we like to use the human-centered design approach that really seeks to find that atomic level root cause and then be able to communicate in the simplest possible language, but do so with the people who are most affected by it. I think it was Mahatma Gandhi who said, "What you do for me without me, you do to me or against me." And so that we cannot show up no matter how well we think we understand the problem. We have to come up with a shared agenda. Secondly, it's to identify what works. Before you start listing all the problems and deficits, we should spend more time counting up all the assets, all the strengths, all the rich history, all the great people, all the things to be proud of. Because oftentimes, if you just invested more in those strengths, you might overcome many of the deficiencies and weaknesses. And we get so focused on the problems, we don't realize how it dehumanizes the people who live in the community if we don't acknowledge the great things that are true and visible there. Third is to focus on place. This kind of holistic approach requires a humility to, I like to say, think small. And what I mean by that is when you're in the community, you're trying to inspire and encourage people to think big. Sky's the limit. What would be the greatest, most ambitious goal you could set for you and your family's future? But when I'm outside the neighborhood, I'm trying to get leaders who tend to want to think big and transform the world overnight to think small. Come and play in this little sandbox, the boundaries of this one neighborhood with us, because together we can stack up so many strategic investments. You accelerate the chance to see real transformation. And then lastly is just that, to transform systems, to not just look at episodic evidence of success or the singular life transformation that's supposed to prove the entire theory. One way to think of it is in mercy work, you're looking for individual touching examples of life on life impact that show the proof of the program per se. But in justice work, it feels colder and more abstract because you're trying to change the average outcome. The average outcome should be significantly different, should match the average outcome of other communities as well. So those 3 things became our name, Lift Orlando. Those 4 things,
And you just listed off, I mean, literally a series of just 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 case making skill sets, literally that you need to have in place in order to make a strong case. I mean, even just at the top, obsessing over the why and getting the root causes, right? That ability to drill down, that really is ground truth. You drill down all the way to the bottom. Keep going, keep going, keep going until the very essence of what's happening becomes resonant and people are like, go after it, solve it. Or even the conversation you had about starting with what's working and asset-based framing the conversation, not just because you want to make people feel good, but because that is what energizes the energy that people need to actually move forward, right? Nobody gets energized about all the problems that are happening in the world. They got enough of their own. What they're energized by is the feeling of what we can do together, what's powerful, what's possible, what's working, what can we lean into? Like folks want to join the winning team. They want to feel like their energies have some place to go, their participatory energy where something wonderful might happen. And when you're able to get people operating out of the energy of that, it changes the nature of the work you have to do. So just all the things that was only 2 things, but when you went through the whole 4, I'm like, oh my God, that's fierce case making right there.
Well, as you've heard me say, that's a real honor to hear coming from you.
So say more about the actual work that Lift Orlando does And I would say brag a little bit. I mean, but every time I talk to you, I'm so inspired about just the list of things you talk about. And what's inspiring to me is you talk about it in such like humble ways. And I'm like, by virtue of the fact that I travel all across the country talking to people about the work they're doing in their communities, I know what incredible feats those are. So talk about that work and give it the full humility that I know you're going to give it, but also brag about a little bit what you've been able to do at Lift Orlando.
Well, I'd say maybe the biggest thing that really lays the groundwork for any of this to be possible goes back to what we were just talking about, is how do we invest in the people that live in the neighborhood? So if disinvestment is the problem, the root behind the root of the problem, then it kind of makes sense that the first step should be, well, how do we reverse that? How do we invest in the neighborhood? And there's 3 dimensions of investment that we really estimate as necessary. Number 1 is to invest in the people that already call the neighborhood home. Who are the folks that really have the most to gain and the most to lose? How do we empower and strengthen and amplify their voices so that they become the agents of change? They become the ones that are actually active. And this is not just fluff and feel good. There's an interesting study that looks at, I mean, we're probably, I'm assuming your age, it might be not that far from mine, but we're probably old enough to remember when most urban cities were just absolute war zones. We had all kinds of movies about places around the country that were lethal. There hasn't been that level of violent, insane, wanton crime in our major cities in decades. In fact, one study says that between 1980 and 2020, there has been a consistent decline in major violent crime in every city in America. And there is no legislation, policy, policing strategy, technology that has grown at the same rate to explain that and why it's happened everywhere. But there has been one factor that is very illuminating, and it's been that at the same rate that crime has dropped, violent crime has dropped, community organizing efforts, humble grassroots initiatives, HOAs, volunteer neighborhood associations, Main Street programs, that grassroots work of people who start connecting and organizing and getting to know each other. And suddenly you don't want to deal drugs on that corner because there's eyes on the street and people aren't lonely and isolated enough because they're involved and engaged. That has been on the rise. We saw disruption of it during the pandemic, but before then we were seeing something really interesting in its impact. And it's still nowhere what it should be when you think about kind of local civic institutions and organizations and the whole bowling alone phenomena, as we've talked about the growth of loneliness in our country. But there's been something that proves that residents organizing to strengthen their own community does wonders to reduce crime, improve health and wellness. Now, what it has not proven to do dramatically is change the economics of a neighborhood. That has been sort of architected for the negative by factors typically outside the neighborhood. What kind of housing gets built, into what volume or quality, the resources that the local school has, the access to healthcare. None of those are decisions that get made at the neighborhood level. They get made somewhere else and they impact the neighborhood. And so we believe you have to invest in place, built in infrastructure. So we've built a campus that is about $120 million of investments when you count tax credits and financing instruments, along with philanthropy, with 200 units of multifamily mixed income housing, 120 units of senior housing, are all around our elementary school, the largest, nicest boys and girls club in the country, a beautiful preschool. I want to pinch myself every time. It's a partnership with Advent Health, the local hospital. So all of our teachers get Advent Health pay and benefits. It's a Primrose school. If you're familiar, they're one of the top brands for early learning. Most parents pay an arm and a leg, multiple hundreds of dollars a week for their child to be cared for here. Here, parents' payment is based on their income. They might pay as little as $60 a week. And then we have our brand new city park in partnership with the city and our local stadium and this health and wellness center where our offices are located. We have a full service healthcare facility that closes the gap of access in our zip code. A financial well-being center, event space for all of our community gatherings and events to happen here. I could go on and on for a while, but the goal has been to create a campus, we call it a community campus, surrounding the school that creates a physical ecosystem where some of our families live in the apartments, work at the early learning center or at the health clinic, have their child in the school, pick them up at the after school program, see their doctor here in this space. And for them, it's like they live in a brand new neighborhood without leaving the community that they love. And we've won multiple awards for design, for architecture, for resident satisfaction. And the goal is to create an environment of choice that would attract higher income families to come back, but retain the affordability to protect our families that have been here historically. Because if you just get people mixing again, we reverse the damages of isolation and concentration and poverty.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is fantastic. And not only do you get that mixing, but you get both the strong ties and what folks call the weak ties, kind of having the same conversation with folks. The ties may be weak. They may only, know folks a little bit, but it's the networks, right, that happen, that improve the ability of folks in community to do amazing things, even outside of the neighborhood. And so you get to capitalize on that. But I want to talk a little bit about just the work to get people to invest in that. I mean, even just at the top of this, you were talking about, what's happened in terms of crime and what's happened in terms of these major cities. And it's the community organizing. It's the folks coming together to build community. And so, you, like many other folks across the country, have been deeply investing, right, and bringing new investors to that conversation. I think there's an incredible opportunity in this moment to bring even more folks because of some of the outcomes you just talked about. And a part of that has to be the way that we make the case to those investors, right? To say, listen, you're not just getting this small community and folks having powerful outcomes here, but the real outcomes are so much bigger than that in ways that are just powerful. Talk to me a little bit about how you think about that, how you talk about that, how you invite people into that kind of conversation.
Absolutely. I mentioned the three dimensions of investment, and I've talked about investing in people and investing in place. And the third speaks to your question, because the reality is that even though investing in place is very different from investing in people, as in it's very top down, capital intensive, it's about bricks and mortar and infrastructure. When you try to do it together with the bottom-up, grassroots, neighborhood-led work of traditional community organizing, these two things are like oil and water. They do not want to mix. People who want to fight for their community don't trust people with a lot of money who can show up and change it quickly. And people with that kind of money don't care for your opinion on how they want to spend it. And so what we try to do then is invest in partnership. Invest in understanding and perspective, but also in creating an ecosystem of collaboration. We rely heavily on the sort of mechanisms of collective impact and its traditional practice. And the idea that by having a shared agenda, by clearly quantifying and agreeing on what our goals are aligning our activities, having continuous communication, and someone, in our case, Lift Orlando, the community quarterback, taking the responsibility to be the lead organization for all of that to happen, brings some of our partners together in ways they would not normally collaborate. I had a new team member starting on her first day. I'm talking to her and I look over her shoulder out the window across the street, and our beautiful Boys and Girls Club door is open, wide open. And I see YMCA employees, lifeguards, walking out of the Boys and Girls Club, and behind them, a line of children from the Boys and Girls Club with swimming trunks and bathing suits. And they're walking around the block across the street to our privately owned apartments to learn how to swim in the swimming pool. And those are three dots do not get naturally connected on their own. Right. And so most of the work of the community quarterback is to try to make all these strands work together and create a stronger safety net for the community. I joke around, and you've heard me give this example before. We all each have our phones. You might have an Android or an iPhone, whatever you prefer to use, and you might really like the device that you use. And if you're connected to Wi-Fi, you might comment on the strength of the signal, your ability to download something, or its weakness. But what nobody ever mentions is that somewhere in the walls of wherever you're at, there's a router that makes sure that signal makes it to your device. And just as in that example, the role of the community quarterback to weave different sources of funds together, the leadership of residents with the leadership of larger civic and community leaders in the business community, the strengths of different nonprofits in ways that might otherwise believe they compete, but actually are stronger together. That vision for how we create something that is more holistic and also more sustainable is a core part of our message. One way to summarize it is that, if we want to invest in the future of children, we have to invest in children and their parents,
Right.
which means we have to invest in the school and the neighborhood around the school.
That's right.
And doing that in such holistic ways allows you to start reversing the direction of prosperity in these communities to see children not only imagine, but actually live out bright futures in a way.
That's right. That's exactly right. I say that every child is just one support system away from success.
Nice.
So if you show me a successful kid, listen, I can show you the support system that's around them, because that's the only way, right, they get to that point, right?
My favorite metaphor for the American dream is that it isn't just this ideal or this sort of inspiring notion. It is it is literally an invention, maybe America's greatest gift to the world, because even philosophically, the idea of every generation prospering and growing better, regardless of where it starts, that was not a common way of thinking. That was not the way the world thought at the time.
That's right.
And to kind of have the hubris to say we were going to rewire and sort of build progress and positive views of the future into the way that our economy and our government and our social system work was a crazy idea.
Right.
But we did it through opportunities like home ownership and education and entrepreneurship and private ownership. Like our government said, we want to create an avenue for generational prosperity as the right of citizens. Now, we didn't make that right available to all citizens equally, but the invention was revolutionary at its time. And my closest metaphor for it is the idea of an escalator. If an escalator is working in the right direction, you still have individual choice. You can choose to not get on it. You can jump off. You can run in the wrong direction. But if you ride it, you just stay doing what you're supposed to be doing. You will find yourself at the top. And when the American dream works in most of our neighborhoods, that's the experience. In fact, you might have seen years ago, I think it was Bridgespan did a study to prove whether the American dream was alive or not still. And they came back and said, listen, statistically in America, if you will graduate from high school, go to college, land a job, and then start a family, you're in the 90th percentile of joining the middle class. So it doesn't matter how poor you start out. And a lot of conservative pundits love to quote it just to say, hey, you need to just get your act together, work harder, pay attention in school. And in fact, the study said that forget college, if you just graduated from high school,
That's right.
landed a job and started a family, you were in the 75th percentile. They came back about 10 years later and said, hey, we looked closely at the numbers and we still stand by our results. But when you plot it out on a map, it's clear that in some neighborhoods, the odds of doing those basic fundamental steps are so hard. It's like asking a child to climb up an escalator in the wrong direction for 12 years. The willpower, the focus, the determination to make it. Meanwhile, in Orlando, our zip code 32805 is you just have to cross the street. If you were able to pick parents on the other side of the road to be in 32804, where the Country Club of Orlando and College Park and these really nice neighborhoods, over there, most children will graduate from high school, go to college, land a job, start a healthy family, zero superhuman effort required. Our kids have to put such incredible effort for the basic level of success that when they make it to the top of the escalator, they rarely want to come back down and help someone else because we all cheer them on for making it and making it out.
That's right. So let's talk about that. Let's really dig in there a little bit, because I think one of the things that's really powerful, even when you started talking about the American dream and the narrative of that, is the larger sort of we, right, underneath that. It didn't say, the dream for folks who are rich or the dream for folks who live in this zip code or the dream for here. It was the American dream, which is big enough to hold all of us. And today, I think we're in a crisis of that moment where not everybody feels like they're part of a bigger we. Folks are breaking off, and only for those folks or these folks or folks who look like that or worship like that or whatever it is. And so there's a real need to bring people back underneath the umbrella of a we to build support for the kinds of investments that would make sure that we all get to ride on the upward escalator.
Yes.
And Lift Orlando is doing something I think is really powerful as a way of trying to get people back under this bigger umbrella around a campaign that says love is local. Like, not just for those over there or here, but for everybody, right? Here's what we're after. Love is local for all of us. Talk a little bit about that, because I think that narrative, which is trying to articulate a bigger vision and the energy of an us, of a we, is really powerful. Talk a little bit about that.
It really is. Thank you for highlighting that. That campaign was an attempt to really simplify the language by which we communicate something that's so human, so fundamental. It relates to all of us. But you spend enough time in this work, in this field, you start talking a lot of fancy words like mixed income and gentrification and all these like SAT words. Most people need a thesaurus to know what you're talking about. And so the thought was like, what if we just talked plain English? The idea that if you want to care, the best way to care for others is to do it in proximity.
That's right.
Which means the place where you live is rich with opportunities for you to serve and give back and make a difference by loving the people that are near you. Yeah. And, you know, I had a mentor in this work, Bob Lupton, sort of a grand poobah of neighborhood revitalization, moved into the inner city of Atlanta like 50, 60 years ago before it was cool. And he used to say that, you know, most of my neighbors, they don't need more programs and services. Sometimes you might argue these communities have too many. What they need most is a caring and connected neighbor. Yeah. And when you think about how you and I, how most of us have advanced our careers, in fact, if we lost our job, our occupation today and tomorrow, we had to start doing something else, 8 times out of 10, that next chapter opens up because of somebody we already knew introducing us to someone we didn't know. It's literally what makes the world go round. When we force people, put people in situations where they have to live in communities where they only know people in the same dire conditions they're in, we cut them off from the network, the social capital that creates that mobility. And so in so many ways, the real goal is to get people reintroduced. It used to be most neighborhoods in America were not economically segregated by the gated community we could each afford.
That's right.
You might have been a family of modest means, but you knew the folks in the big house on the corner. You knew who ran the grocery store, who owned the hardware store. And in that context, you were more proximate to opportunity. Today, we are so far apart from each other based on our level of income. It's very, very hard for people to build those networks. And so for us, Love is Local is about recognizing the value of neighborhoods, of communities that care for each other at every level of income, every strata of society, and ultimately to introduce that we should care for all of our neighborhoods, that a city is only as strong as the strength of its neighborhoods. And so even if you don't know where Westlakes is, the neighborhood where we work in, but you love Orlando, then you should care about what happens to children in Westlakes, because what happens to those children will impact what happens to this city. And so that connection that we're all in the same lot together is part of what we've lost in our isolation and our economic segregation, the way we've designed and built communities. If we could just create more high quality options in the inner city where people of all levels of income and education want to choose to be there because it's that good, that nice, without pushing out the people that are good, hardworking families that want to build a future there as well, we can start to reintegrate. And you see it in the suburbs in many ways. Oftentimes you see suburbs that are highly racially integrated, but there's a harmony in that people see themselves as belonging to the same lot. And that's really what we want to create in the urban core as well, and in some of our isolated rural communities.
I love that. In so many ways, just powerful, especially in terms of the moment that we're in, where there's a lot of controversy about what words you're not supposed to say, and can you say this versus that. You know, I think it's a challenge and an opportunity for us to say it more plainly. Love is local. Listen, you,
Thank you.
you can't
Uh,
legislate those words out of existence, okay?
that's right.
That's right. But I also appreciate just, the conversation about proximity, because I think that's a huge issue. I mean, we're talking about isolation and what that does to folks and what it looks like when you bring people back into community with one another. And if that's the exercise that we are about, that has that's powerful well beyond just the individual relationships that we're building in community. It's actually bigger than that. So I want to talk about the bigger container, because you and I have had some conversations also just about the aspirations to think more regionally, and what does it look like, both the opportunities to continue to build deeply and go even more deeply in Westlakes, but also the need to connect Westlakes to a lot of what's happening across the region, because of the opportunity to strengthen the impact, both for the folks who are in Westlakes, but just across the region, right? So would love to hear you talk a little bit about that, about both the aspiration of that, the opportunities and the challenges of that. Yeah.
I do think we have an opportunity to modernize community development and the way that we act as civic leaders, whether you're in the business community or in some other capacity. I've heard David Erickson at the New York Fed back when he was at the San Francisco Fed talk about that we're in the third generation of community development in America. The first wave was public housing, the 30-year government insured mortgage to address housing for Americans. And some of that was amazing, produced some of the greatest wealth in the history of the world. Some of it was not so great. A lot of terrible things came out of public housing eventually. The second wave was sort of the institution of tax credit programs and government initiatives that fostered, clinics and after-school programs and health and wellness centers and low-income housing tax credits. And those were great. A little bit more ad hoc and somewhat scattered, very rarely part of a master plan and a focused strategy. That this idea of realizing that we have an opportunity by focusing on specific high priority neighborhoods is the way I like to describe them. We can gain the greatest bang for the buck for the whole region. That the greatest return for the well-being, you look at the negative numbers on any city or market, you look at crime, education, health, you can put that on a map and find that most of those numbers are concentrated in these neighborhoods that have not received equal investment. And when you then understand that, you realize, the best thing for all of us is to prioritize those places. And my favorite example comes from the world of healthcare. It used to be that if you were my doctor and you wanted to treat me for some cancerous attack on my body, your best option was to radiate all of me, kill a little bit of all of me in hopes of making that cancer stop. Today, we sometimes have the option of surgically, like a laser, focusing in on where that problem exists. And in that single act, I don't touch the rest of you, but I give all of you life. This is what's happening in our cities. We have an opportunity to look at our entire community and say, let's address the places that we have neglected and turn them into places of thriving, and you will watch the entire region thrive.
Absolutely.
And so it's a way for us to all both share in the lot of our most forgotten neighbors, but also create a bright future for them. There's also a sense that in the business community, we get so obsessed over big ideas to change the world with big causes and big flashy events and great large numbers of people. And this is much more counterintuitive. We're talking about a limited number of people in a limited number of places. But the joy of justice that comes when you experience the satisfaction of people in your own backyard, children whose eyes you can see, families and places that your employees and customers can know by name and brag about and drive around with their family and say, we were good neighbors here, and look at the fruit of what's happening, and see that play out over time is so much more sustainable, so much more rewarding, gives so much more economic value to your brand, to your employee engagement, to the reputation of your company, but also to the lives that you're directly impacting, because you're doing something that isn't a marketing gimmick, it isn't greenwashing, it is real life transformation. And I've seen the most hardened of capitalistic CEOs
Yep.
have their hearts melted by
Love
the
that.
realization that they can change lives if they just pay attention. And so I
Absolutely.
think that's the game we need to be playing now, because we can do something that isn't beating people with power over the head with a club about how they're guilted into doing some good deed,
right.
but reminding them there's nothing more rewarding, and letting them discover that joy.
Absolutely. And the way that I often talk about some of that work in the case making space is reminding folks of the possibilities for their legacy. What does your legacy look like? And when people are asked to think about that and talk about that, especially when it's done in the context of ground truth, when we know the truth is what's happening and what is your legacy relationally to that, wow, it is just such a powerful combination of pulling people forward in so many ways that I'm often like sort of trying to beat the drum of that. Come on, folks. Come on, folks. I know that it's tough sometimes for folks to lean into that, right? Because they want to have a conversation just about what we all deserve as human beings. And I say, I get that.
Yes.
Yes, we all do. We all do. It's a great place to live in a community that's thriving with opportunities for, play space and environmental justice and all the things. But the way often to get people to show up to that conversation is to often have a conversation about what's their legacy. And I don't really care how that has to happen. I just know that there's so many folks in the community that I'm from who really need that to happen, right?
Yes.
Whether you gotta, ask Beyonce to make a song about it, or I don't really care. What I care about at the end of the day is exactly what you were talking about. When kids have a future, because we've invested powerfully, and however we have to get there, let's get there.
I love how you said that, and I love that framework of yours of sort of the balance of ground truthing and legacy in the conversation. That was really helpful for me the first time I heard you say it. What I've clung to for a while is this idea of when you really think about the impact that certain emotions that you trigger have on the audience, on the people that you're talking to, then you have to consider what the outcome will be of your communication. So, for example, if I made you feel guilty about something now and really laid it on thick for you to realize what a culprit you are in a particular situation, what's most likely is you will want this conversation to end as quickly as possible. You will change the subject. You will most likely want to hide from those facts, and you will hoard anything that's proven evidence that you should do something about it. If, in contrast, instead of guilt, I help you see the great miracle that this country has provided in the opportunities that you've had, and the fact that that is evidence that we know how to provide prosperity to anybody. We just haven't done it equally for everybody. And that you've been a recipient for no reasons that you can take credit for. Yes, you've worked hard. Yes, you've put in the hours. You've done all that hard work, and you've benefited from the environment, the time in history, the moment and place that has afforded you those opportunities. If I can get you to feel grateful, some people never get there, but gratitude has a completely different reaction. When I feel profoundly grateful, generosity comes very easily. My hands open up because I feel I have more than enough. I have more than I deserve. Now you show me where there's a need. Things flow so much more easily from that place because I'm not worried about you trying to take anything away from me. I'm not worried about me seeming less for having more. No, this is why I have more. And it feels great to share it when I feel that I have more than enough. And if we can help more Americans that have been so blessed realize how blessed they have been and let that sink in, generosity is more likely to flow from gratitude than it will ever flow out of guilt.
And that is why you are a fierce case maker. Eddie, thank you so much for joining me today. You knock it out of the park every single time, just in terms of your thoughtfulness and just the way that you bring your heart and head to every conversation. That balance, that loving, healthy, thoughtful, compassionate, smart, forward-looking balance is why Lift Orlando, right, is where it is today. Just doing great, grand, amazing things for the people, not just in Westlakes, but across the entire region that you and I both live in. So thank you for that. And for being a guest with me today, for being a model for folks who are trying to do what you're doing, and who can learn so much from your journey.
Thank you so much. What a privilege it is. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining me today. You know, every new conversation we have with a fierce case-maker gives me new energy for the road. And I hope that as you listen today, you felt the same way. You know, I believe in casemakers everywhere. And if you don't quite see the fierce case-maker in you just yet, hold on, just trust. Work those principles so that you can bring new champions to your justice journey. And if this information inspired you, then please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that you can be one of the first folks who knows when a new episode is dropped. And until next time, stay fierce.